Hi, folks. Welcome to Israel Explained. Today we have a sad edition when eight IDF soldiers were killed in Lebanon yesterday in operations against Hezbollah. Over 50 injured. The names of those who were killed are Ido Breuer, Almken Terefe, Or Mansur, Eitan Itzhak, Nazar Itkin, Harel Ettinger, Noam Barzilai, Ariel Gat, and one of them, Eitan Oster, left a very inspiring video not long before he was killed. He said, I see it as a historical privilege, and with God's help, as something that will also affect our future generations. I know the size of the responsibility that rests on my shoulders. There's no one prouder than me to lead fighters forward towards fulfilling our missions. End quote. So here are the details of what happened that led to the death of the eight soldiers. The operation right now is focusing on the villages and rural areas right near the border, where there's a significant Hezbollah infrastructure designed to support a raids or a possible invasion into Israel, as well as to shoot rockets and anti-tank fire directly at civilians. One of the rural houses not far from the border, IDF ran into a squad of Hezbollah that was ambushing them there. Some soldiers were killed. The Hezbollah terrorists were also killed in that exchange. Then, when the medics came to try to evacuate the wounded and the dead. The medics were attacked from a distance by anti-tank fire, and that's where six of the soldiers got killed in the attack and the attack on the medics that followed that. Two other soldiers in a separate incident were killed from anti-tank fire as well. So the operation here is a limited one, like I said, of clearing the infrastructure near the border. But unfortunately, Hezbollah has been waiting for Israel to start an operation like this for a very long time, was fully prepared. And even though there have been serious disruptions, as we know, to their command structure due to that beeper operation, assassination of Nasrallah, and many others, uh, that hasn't necessarily disrupted the operations on the ground near the border that may be self-sustaining and that the squads there have their orders set. And unfortunately, we're seeing that here. We had an illusion that this war might be different from Gaza, maybe less costly, maybe less difficult. It was easy to get swept up in the optimism of those early operations. And, they were incredible successes. But that doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, when you put boots on the ground in enemy territory, soldiers are at risk, soldiers will die, and there will be casualties. There had been a lot of talk before the war started in Lebanon, before the invasion started in Lebanon, that the Radwan forces, the commandos of the Hezbollah, and that appears to be what the IDF is fighting against right now, are stronger than the Nukhba commandos of Hamas, the ones who executed October 7th and have put up a lot of the resistance in Gaza to Israel. This incident doesn't tell us that that's true, but it's certainly something that we'll be watching for. Um, are these Hezbollah terrorists better able to counter IDF than Hamas? Are they going to be causing this much damage regularly, or is this just a bad day? Because the IDF did have some very bad days in Gaza as well, as we know, sometimes with many soldiers dying, often in buildings, booby traps, those sorts of things, also anti-tank missiles. So we don't know yet what this means, if this means that Hezbollah is more dangerous or less dangerous. Certainly, when Israel was fighting Hezbollah in the security strip in Lebanon for many years, the IDF soldiers had a very difficult time of it. Certainly more difficult than they've been having with Hamas in in Gaza. Now, uh, it's important to say that even though this operation is very costly, or seems to be costly so far, it's essential. The northern residents of Israel must be able to return home. Otherwise, Israel can't call itself a sovereign state. It can't have evacuated cities like Kiryat Shmona and Metula. That's just not sustainable. And in order to do that, the Hezbollah positions nearby have to be evacuated. The problem is, how far do you go? How much of Lebanon do you go into in order to do that? That's problem number one. And the second problem is, how do you keep it empty from Hezbollah? So those are the two issues that Israel faces. A lot of the fire coming at the northern villages and cities is coming from anti-tank missiles. Those have a range of 8 kilometers. So does that mean that you have to go 8 kilometers into Lebanon? That has some very obvious problems with control of a relatively wide area over an entire international border? Or do you do it just near villages? What exactly are the mechanics there? What the IDF is leaning towards right now, from what I'm hearing, is trying to create a sort of cordon sanitaire, a area where Hezbollah cannot take root and also where civilians can't live. Whether whether that will be a 1 kilometer strip like what the IDF is planning or has created in Gaza, or whether it will be bigger, most likely it will be bigger, is a question. The IDF believes that the forward villages, the Shiite villages, and there's also a couple of Christian ones in the area as well, and that raises separate questions, are basically forward Hezbollah positions and therefore need to be evacuated. And then once they're removed, the idea would be to keep an area clean of Hezbollah, clean of civilians, but hopefully without the idea of actually occupying it. So there would be patrols by, helicopter, air force, various technological means, cameras, sensors, those sorts of things, mines, in order to keep that. And that seems to be the most likely direction where this is going. So we're talking more about a DMZ or a no-go zone rather than the sort of security strip that Israel had created there in the past, which didn't end up working so well, and Israel had to withdraw. But like I said, with anti-tank missiles and rockets, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. It ameliorates the problem and it makes it more safe to return, but doesn't make it completely safe to return. Especially also there can be tunnels dug under it, all those sorts of things. The Hezbollah uses the Cornet, the Almas anti-tank missiles to devastating effect. It can also slip into an area and shoot from there. So there's a lot of concerns, but creating that cordon is definitely a lot better than not creating it. So perhaps if that is there, the residents will return home, even though the risks will not have been completely ameliorated. While Israel is doing that, it's continuing its very high profile program of assassinating the Hezbollah leadership. Just in the last 24 hours, it assassinated the individual in charge of procuring weapons for Hezbollah. Then, when he was killed, he was replaced by his brother, and his brother was immediately assassinated. So that's continuing apace. Those two things together, Israel's hoping, will start to crack Hezbollah. It's certainly not going to stop because of the 8 soldiers who tragically died, but it's been a very, very difficult day. There will be no easy answers for Lebanon. There will be no easy operation. This will not go smoothly. And we have to remember, it's going to be almost impossible to outright defeat Hezbollah without taking over all of Lebanon. And even then, hard to believe. So the biggest threat here on a strategic level is mission creep. We don't want Israel to start expanding the areas that it's taking over. That will lead to more dead soldiers. That will lead to having to expand the operation further. What Israel wants to do is try to crack Hezbollah while keeping the goals of the operations as narrow and achievable as possible, while being able to bring the residents home to the north. Very difficult line to walk, but I think one that's possible to walk as long as Israel uses prudence and is very careful with what it does. So a very sad day indeed, a very terrible way to start the Jewish new year. I do have some questions from yesterday's um, episode, so here they are. Um, Aya Juz asks, if Israel hits Iran's oil facilities, I can't imagine them sitting quietly with no response. Would they hit Israeli gas rigs, and do they have the capability to do so? So it looks to me like Israel will hit the oil facilities, like I said in the last episode. That seems the most logical next step. I don't believe Iran has the capability to hit Israel back. Certainly not with the same amount of harm. But I wouldn't be surprised if they would try. What Iran's doing is they're not really able to hurt Israel all that much, it appears. So it's searching for anything it can do, trying a lot of different things at the same time, recruiting agents for assassinations, terror attacks, missiles. They'll try what they can. If they can do that, they will. My guess is they can. Vanilovan asks, the addition of Sa'ar to the coalition now means that any party that wants to topple him has to do it with the cooperation of another party, except for Shas. Does Bibi now find himself with more flexibility on all fronts to wind things down and try to win 2026 as the premier who won the war? Or does every political incentive still hamstring progress from Bibi? I think the this doesn't give him much flexibility to end the war. It gives him a little bit more flexibility. Ultimately, your Ben-Gvir and Smotrich uh, together um, can still bring him down with Sa'ar, right? And Sa'ar is a hawk, so it gives him a little bit more flexibility, but not much more. Um, I hope that you're right, and this allows him to reach a ceasefire when the time is right. But I think a lot of the incentive that Netanyahu has not to reach a ceasefire is that once the war's over, the Israeli people will come to account with him. There'll be a lot of pressure on him to form a um, investigative committee, and um, that could happen just in time to make him lose the 2026 elections. So a lot of that still remains. You know, a lot of the quote unquote lack of elasticity, lack of um, flexibility that Netanyahu has is him limiting himself rather than the coalition, rather than Biden or all of those sorts of things. So I have my concern, but this does widen his margins to possibly pursue a hostage deal, to possibly widen the war if he so wishes. Right now, he seems to be more inclined to widen the war, and Saar would be more enthusiastic about widening the war than he would be about a ceasefire. Question from Yoxi. The military advantage resulting from the string of successes, as you put it, is hard to consume when Israel is not trying to leverage this by opening political negotiations. On the other hand, the amount of hatred farmed as these successes are paid for by horrendous amounts of innocent blood does not seem to be heralding long-term security for Israel. Do you agree? Um, I agree to some extent. The way you're framing it makes it seem like um, the loss of innocent lives is the major geopolitical threat to Israel. I don't think it is. I think the main threat to Israel is it biting off more than it can chew. That's the main thing that Israel needs to be concerned about now. Protecting lives of innocents is very important to me on a moral level. And it certainly is good for Israel's interest to avoid it too. But I think the amount of people killed wouldn't matter that much in terms of the wide strategy of it all if Israel was pursuing a political framework, a political solution, as you pointed out. I don't think that the amount of people that died would mean that Israel could never do that and never live securely. The problem is if instead of trying to reach solutions when it has the upper hand, it just keeps pushing until it no longer has the upper hand, which is what really concerns me. That overreach, that overstretch of seeing that that those successes have fed an appetite to keep escalating, and that's my main concern. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon at Shael Media. Consider listening to my history podcast, History of the Land of Israel podcast. And I will see you here again, I am sure, very soon.